Hi everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me here today to speak. So firstly, I'll be talking about the circular economy and adaptive reuse for renovation and regeneration of buildings. We're looking at training clauses for tenders and also looking at resources and tools. So yeah, I suppose in relation to the structure of this, I'll be looking at the background, and speaking about the Irish Green Building Council and the built environment impact on the environment. Talking about what is a circular economy and why is it important to the construction industry, key actions to creating a circular design, a circular building, adaptive reuse for renovation and regeneration of buildings, talking about the levels framework, and also recommended resources and tools to utilize. So a little bit about myself. My name is Rachel Lockery. I'm the program manager. I'm a program manager within the Irish Green Building Council for projects such as the CO2 performance ladder and the construction materials exchange. And I'm also a registered architect with the Royal Institute of Architects of Ireland. So the Irish Green Building Council, we are leading the built environment towards zero carbon future. We are a membership organisation with over 400 members. We're focusing on raising awareness, driving changes through, for example, policy submissions, improving skills. We have a lot of training courses on topics such as whole life carbon, circularity, and also looking at raising standards. So we have, I suppose, programs such as the Home Performance Index, which maybe some people here heard of, tools such as the Carbon Designer tool, which is aligned with one-click LCA tools, and we run the environmental product declarations in Ireland. So here's just some of our members, and you might recognize some of them. And the Irish Green Building Council is part of the World Green Building Council, which has 70 countries in it and over 35,000 members. You can see all the countries on this map here. I suppose the reason the Irish Green Building Council exists, the reason I am here today speaking, is because we are in a climate and biodiversity crisis. As the EPA has stated, the outlook for Ireland is not optimistic. And the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis is the biggest issue of our generation. And it's not just an issue in relation to the environmental damage, in relation to climate justice and all the social and humanitarian issues in relation to it, but also it's a big threat to our financial stability. And yes, we need to start acting now. And this is why I'm here today, to tell you ways to take action within the construction industry. So in relation to the impact of the carbon emissions from the built environment, so in Ireland, 37% of our emissions come from the built environment, 23% are operational, and 14% are embodied carbon. So this is the equivalent of the agricultural emissions in Ireland, which is interesting because there's a lot of talk about, I suppose we need to limit the agricultural emissions, but not that much talk about limiting the built environment emissions. And this is where we come in, because we can make this big impact in reducing these emissions. I suppose just some background in relation to big changes that are going to be coming up. So the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, also known as EPBD, which is for new and existing buildings, is going to be implemented within the European Union. And the statements or the objectives of the EPBD are that all new buildings should be zero emission buildings by 2030, and existing buildings should be transformed into NZ by 2030 and ZEB, zero emission buildings, from 2030. And I suppose this is looking at, the worst performing buildings and how they can be brought up to standards, looking at building renovation passports, indoor environmental quality, and I suppose importantly, disclosure of global warming potential, which is whole life carbon. And this is part of the scope that will be included within EPBD. And what I'll be talking about today is also very aligned to the EU taxonomy, which has 6 environmental objectives. So I'll go through them here. So it's protection of ecosystems, climate change mitigation, climate change adaptation, protection of water and marine resources, pollution control, and a transition to a circular economy, which this presentation is focused on. So what is the circular economy? The circular economy is the opposite of our linear take, make, waste economy, which we are currently in. It aims to keep materials, components, and products in use in the economy for as long as possible. You can see in this image here, the linear economy, everything goes to waste. There is this recycling economy, which we are also slightly in, which means that the materials circulate for a while, but also ultimately end up as waste. So within the circular economy, everything stays in circulation and waste is eradicated. So that's where we're trying to aim for. If we're just looking at implementing the recycling economy, we are at a stage within the climate and biodiversity crisis that we really need to be just looking at the circular economy. And this is why I'll share how to do that within the built environment. So some important stats is that resource extraction is responsible for 45% of the world's carbon emissions, and extraction causes 80% of biodiversity loss. So the circular economy gives us the tools to tackle climate change and biodiversity loss together while addressing important social needs, such as climate justice. So here's a quote from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which I'd highly recommend looking into, a fantastic organization with loads of resources about the built environment. But the foundation states that a circular economy is an industrial system that is restorative or regenerative by intention and design. It replaces the end-of-life concept with restoration, shifts towards the use of renewable energy, eliminates the use of toxic chemicals which impair reuse, and aims for the elimination of waste through the superior design of materials, products, systems, and within this, business models. So currently only 7.2% of the world is circular. In 2019, 9% of the world is circular. So we are currently moving in the wrong direction. Ireland has the second worst circularity rate in Europe at 1.6%. So this transition to the circular economy, I suppose, aligns with financial benefits, but also enables us to avoid climate catastrophe. So why we need to, as a country, transition to a circular economy is also because of the fact that we're very privileged in Ireland that we are not feeling devastating effects of the climate crisis to the extent of other countries, and it's important that we take responsibility for our actions in this country, and I suppose limit the impact on countries that are not set up in relation to climate adaptation. So it's important to, I suppose, hone into that. It's a very purposeful work in relation to implementing the circular economy within the built environment. So the built environment is responsible for almost 50% of raw material consumption in Europe. And in Europe, the construction industry produces the largest source of waste annually. Over the last number of years, the world at large has been focused on the journey of switching to renewable sources of energy, which is great. But as I stated before, this addresses only 55% of the global emissions. And the rest comes from the fact that we are stuck in a linear economy. So I suppose in construction, we are, excavating materials, we're mining materials, we're using these building materials in buildings, and then these are all ending up as construction waste or downcycled to a degree that they won't be able to stay in circulation for a very long time. And this is just an image from the EPA which showcases the linear system of building, which is resource extraction, production, distribution, consumption, and disposal. And then the circular economy in the built environment has a lot more principles, such as looking at, like, for example, renovation and retrofit, designing and procuring in a circular and green way, and moving away from demolition, looking at deconstruction and implementing, for example, a pre-demolition plan if you are taking any materials out of the building or renovating in any way. And some just really vital facts that aren't too well known in the industry at the moment is that currently 57.5% of our waste in Ireland comes from construction and demolition waste. which is way above the European average of 1/3. So this is the majority of our waste in Ireland comes from our industry. And currently only 1% of all construction materials are reused, and most of these materials are landfilled. So I suppose, and as an industry, we should strive to save and retain these materials at their highest value and save their embodied carbon. And reusing materials is not a new process. It's been done for many, many, many years. Here's some examples of buildings, that are new buildings that are focusing on reuse. And there's a building called KA13 by Mad Architecture in Norway, and they have created a building using 80% of reused materials. For example, Holbein Gardens has utilized structural steel that's reclaimed in their building. Arab uses, I suppose, focuses on circularity principles and reuses facades, for example. There's amazing groups such as Superuse, which are focused on, I suppose, 100% circular buildings. And most of their buildings are over 90% circular. So I was saying these principles are not new. The linear economy is actually only around 150 years old. So we have all these resources and I suppose precedents of how we can, be in this other economy, which is the circular regenerative economy. So how do we transition to a circular model in construction? These are the 4 core principles of how to do this. So one of them is design for adaptability, design for deconstruction, circular material selection, and resource efficiency. So I'll go through each of these aspects now. So design for adaptability. So an adaptable building is a building that has been designed with thought of how it might be easily altered to prolong its life. So for instance, by addition or contraction, and to suit new uses or patterns of use. Whereas a flexible building is a building that has been designed to allow easy rearrangement of its internal fit out and arrangement to suit the changing needs of the occupants. And there is an amazing writer and researcher called Stuart Brand, and he has written a book about design for adaptability. And I stated that almost no buildings adapt well. They're designed not to adapt, also budgeted and financed not to, constructed not to, administered not to, maintained not to, regulated and taxed not to, even remodeled not to. But all buildings, except monuments, adapt anyway, however poorly, because the usages in and around them are changing constantly. And this is the reason why buildings are demolished. As you can see in the left, here's building being demolished because it wasn't designed to be adapted. And Stuart Brand created a system called designing in layers. I suppose the ethos behind designing in layers is that the lifetime of different elements of a building can vary from well over 100 years down to a matter of months or even weeks. The structure and fabric of a building, when made from durable materials such as stone, slate, brick, or concrete, has been proven to last for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And newly installed components can fail in a few weeks or torn out by the client and can be very damaging to the building. So this is, I suppose, designing with layers is a different approach to buildings, designing for longevity and designing for adaptability and disassembly. So you can see here in this image, this is I suppose how you go about designing with layers. You would look at the layer, you'd look at the lifespan of the layer. So you can see here, for example, surfaces are around 7 to 20 years and the structure is 30 to 300 years. So we want to separate those two elements so it's easy to change the surfaces. So a way to design for adaptability is to scenario plan and scenario model. So using scenario planning to determine the alternative potential futures for the building, and this should lessen the chances of the building being so tailored to one use that it quickly becomes obsolete. The scenario modeling is used to test alternative futures for buildings. It is designed to explore how they can be adapted to new uses, and the modeling includes developing building services strategies that ensure short-term flexibility and long-term adaptability. So there's a lot of offices in Europe and in England that scenario plan for every single building that they are asked to design. And therefore, these buildings can be adapted to these uses, and it's been proven that they can. And here's an example of a building that has been designed for adaptability. It is the Herman Miller building, which was transformed into the Bath School of Art, designed by Sir Nicholas Grimshaw. So I suppose the ethos behind this building was that our needs will change, the scale of the operation will change, things about us will change, and we will change. And this building was designed, as you can see from the image here, with a double height space formed from a 10 by 20 meter steel grid with only lightweight mezzanines and partitions. And this could be configured or reconfigured in a way that allowed for adaptability. There was a modular facade placed on the building, which allowed the building to be adapted easily. So the building was adapted from a warehouse structure to a school due to, for example, the space between the steel columns and also just the general overscaling of the floor to ceiling height and the light as well from the modular facade. So moving on now to design for deconstruction. So design for deconstruction is a design concept in which buildings and products are designed intentionally for material recovery, value retention, and meaningful next use. So being able to extract components from buildings intact is an important part of applying the circular economy. Components that have reached their end of life or need repair have to be easily accessible rather than buried in other materials. So elements of a building that are to be removed as part of a refurbishment or refit have to be recovered without damage so that they can be reused or remanufactured. And here's an example of a deconstruction plan. So when you're designing a building, you're doing all the drawings, all the specs, and then you need to figure out how this building can be taken apart. And doing that at the very start of the design process is incredibly useful and just simpler than trying to do it afterwards when everything gets a bit more complicated. So a detailed deconstruction plan should be produced and issued to all parties at the beginning of any contract to ensure the construction processes will allow the deconstruction plan to be successful. So this plan should include a statement of strategy for the building project, a list of building elements and how they can be reused, reclaimed, recycled, and instructions on the deconstruction of elements. So moving now on to circular material selection. So within the circular economy, there's two strands of materials, and one is biological bio-based materials, and the other are technical materials. You can see here in the image, there's many biological materials that we can utilize now, and also there's many technical materials. But in the circular economy, we're trying to focus on using biological or bio-based materials, which I'll explain why now. So I'll explain what a biological material is. So biological material can safely re-enter the natural world once they've gone through one or more use cycles, where they will biodegrade over time, returning the embedded nutrients to the environment. It's important with biological materials to keep them as natural as possible, avoid contamination by using finishes and adhesives that cannot be safely or easily removed later. You can see there's many examples such as wood, mycelium, hemp, cork, wool, bio-waste, and there's many more. And I suppose with all these biological materials, they also have a low embodied carbon. Also, they sequester carbon. So for example, timber sequesters carbon, which is really important. And it's as anyone involved in construction, we need to be using these types of materials because of the climate and biodiversity crisis that we are in. So in relation to technical materials, these materials that cannot safely re-enter the environment, these materials such as metals, plastics, and synthetic chemicals must continuously cycle through the system so their value can be captured and recaptured. Generally, technical materials end up in landfill, as you can see here. This is the UPVC window frame landfill. So these materials cannot biodegrade. So we really need to be moving away from using these types of materials and moving towards biological materials. And a lot of innovative and I suppose forward-thinking architects now are looking at using these materials within buildings. So highly recommend using them. I suppose in relation to like circular material selection, there's the use of biological materials, which is very useful. But that's also involved. There's also extraction involved in that. Whereas in the use of reclaimed materials, these materials already exist on the earth, and all these materials that are being put into landfill actually can be reused in some way or other, be it in the construction industry or other industries. And all these materials are worth money. So anyone involved in the construction industry now knows that materials are going up and up and up because of, I suppose, the use of fossil fuels and the rising of cost of fossil fuels. This is just going to be a continued trajectory. Whereas if we start using reclaimed materials, yes, it's going to be much more affordable and also just incredibly environmentally friendly. I suppose that's why the Irish Green Building Council created the Construction Materials Exchange, which is also known as CMX. So this is a user-friendly digital platform that connects organizations with each other so they can exchange or trade excess or reclaimed construction materials. And the purpose is to divert construction materials from entering waste streams and supply materials to be reused. And the Irish Green Building Council collaborated with the Access Materials Exchange to create this circular infrastructure. Here is an example of the platform interface and the materials that are on the platform now. This is a material, a facade material, Italian granite, that is currently in County Kildare. And there are a number of people who are trying to procure for their buildings at the moment, which is exciting. And CMX uses AI and blockchain technology and tracking and tracing to allow ease of, I suppose, use of these materials. And importantly, each material is given a material passport. So a material passport is a digital document that contains information on all the parts in a particular product material. It's basically like an ingredients list for the material, and it gives the material the respect it deserves, and it showcases the worth of these materials. And you can see kind of how a material passport would be laid out here. And it's a big part of, I suppose, the circular economy and circular material selection. And here's just an example of another material passport. So there's many ways to do it, but the main thing is just to showcase, for example, the amount of carbon emissions that are being saved by using this material, and also just where the material comes from, and the quality of the material. So, for example, in relation to, like, I suppose, the environmental financial evaluation of these reclaimed materials, the granite that's currently on CMX, and by reusing this, means you're saving 214 kg CO2 equivalent emissions. And you're also, I suppose, saving financially because you're not buying new material. Also, importantly, the wait time for these materials is incredibly low due to the fact that these materials are all in Ireland and ready to be reused. Also, I suppose, linked to circular material selection is the importance of doing a pre-demolition audit, which isn't very common in Ireland at the moment, but it's something that's very, very common in, for example, the Netherlands, and it's a big part of the circular economy within the built environment. So many perfectly reusable materials are discarded, I suppose, during demolition, and this is due to a lack of foresight, also a lack of time, which is important. I suppose, but with pre-demolition audits, it involves identifying, before starting construction work, all the elements that could be reused, ensuring they receive distinct treatment to preserve the potential for reuse. So looking at careful dismantling and storage. So there's a good guidelines from FCRBE project, and the reuse toolkit, the reclamation audit, which goes through basically how to create a pre-demolition audit. But generally, you do need an external consultant to do that. RICS has done some pre-demolition audits for a project in Limerick, so that's probably a good consultant to contact if you're interested, and if you're taking materials or refurbishing buildings to an extent that you would need a pre-demolition audit. I suppose in relation to CMX, it is being utilised in big organisations in Ireland, in state organisations, and also in private organisations. I suppose the focus of all of this is to normalise material reuse in the construction sector. So here's just a checklist in relation to material reuse. So it's important to select, reuse, and reclaim components and materials, especially high embodied carbon materials such as structural items. So generally 70% of the embodied carbon of a building is in the structure of the building. So that's why it's important to look at, for example, specifying structural steel, or at least low embodied carbon materials for structures such as timber. Avoiding products materials that blend bio-based materials and technical materials in such a way they cannot be separated later. We should be avoiding composite materials in the circular economy. looking for materials with certifications such as cradle to cradle, and just general reclaimed materials. Important to look at minimization within the circular economy. So removing finishes or using natural finishes. So if you place a finish that's toxic on a bio-based material or a biological material, the material is going to be not going to be able to be put back into the earth. And if it is, it's going to damage the soil. So it's important not to do that. And also, I suppose, in relation to circular economy, this is also a different sort of topic, but leasing lighting, furniture, lifts, and leasing what we can in buildings is a great way to engage with the circular economy. So every material you reuse means that material is saved from landfill, incineration, or being backfilled. And this reduces extraction, waste, and saves the materials of the embodied carbon in materials. And in relation to existing buildings, I suppose it's Part D, which is Material Workmanship Building Regulation, 2013. This is just, I suppose, maybe some people know here, but in the case of material alterations or material changes of use of existing buildings, the adaptation without modification to guidance this document may not in all circumstances be appropriate, but however, it basically states that you can reuse materials that are reclaimed within existing buildings, but within new buildings. And I suppose the area of Part D to reference, if you're interested in this, is M1.1c, which states that basically if material has been proven to be able to be, or proven to be up to standard in a building, an existing building, you can take that material and put it into a new building. This is all under Part D. And I can talk a bit more about that. That's probably a larger topic to get into. And here's just an example of a building using 100 bio-based materials. I get asked quite a lot about, I suppose, the use of bio-based materials in buildings, in architecture, and there's many options basically to utilize. This is a great example of that. And bio-based materials are being used in large-scale construction, especially in European countries such as the Netherlands, such as France. So we can use them in Ireland as well. In relation to the circular economy as well, we need to limit our resources. So did you know that 30% of all water production is used in construction, which is shocking. So we need to see how we can limit this. And a way to do that is using buildings that already exist, considering the incorporation of water harvesting and recycling, and using, for example, regenerative, I suppose, ways of energy or using energy such as solar panels or thermal energy. And a big part of the circular economy, or one of the main parts in many ways, is just using what already exists. So be it materials or be it full-scale buildings. And I suppose this comes back to the case for beautiful buildings. If a building is considered beautiful, it's very unlikely that it's going to be demolished. Where if a building is considered to be ugly, it is very likely to be demolished, or in some ways may be demolished. So it's important to, as architects, people involved in construction, to design in a very aesthetically pleasing way. And here's a quote from Carl Alfante, an architect, that the greenest building is the one already existing. And there are many vacant properties in Ireland that can be renovated. And we need to start doing that rather than consistently building, because we're going to completely blow our carbon budget if we are building this in the way that we're building now in Ireland. So moving on now to the adoption of buildings. So cultural heritage buildings hold a unique niche in the urban landscape as they embody the local, cultural, and historic characteristics that define communities. So extending their usual lifespan has multiple benefits that go beyond the project itself to the surrounding area, contributing to sustainable development. But decision makers lack knowledge of the environmental benefits and tools for adaptive reuse of cultural heritage buildings. So adaptive reuse within architecture is defined as a process in which buildings are adapted for new uses while retaining their historic fabric and features. It is emerged as a term to respect the past and protect the future. This approach also enhances the space and experience of a structure, but also reducing the carbon footprint associated with its construction. by reducing the amount of energy associated with demolition and the subsequent raw materials needed for the construction of an entirely new building. Adaptive reuse can be utilized as an essential tool in the future of environmentally conscious architecture. Adaptive reuse can be the perfect way to breathe new life into an old building while conserving resources and historic value. So adaptive reuse reduces the amount of raw material required to produce a new structure, and this construction process adapts the material already available at hand using more minimal interventions in order to retain the historic fabric. As well as this, the absence of the demolition of a structure further saves energy. And as we know, demolition is an energy-intensive construction approach, which is required for a new build. Adaptive reuse must also encapsulate a revaluing of the building stock we already have. And here's just examples of adaptive reuse. This is the Medieval Mile Museum by McCullum Mulvin Architects, which is a beautiful example of adaptive reuse. Definitely highly recommend going down to this building and visiting if you have a chance. I have a number of other examples here. I'm just aware that it's now, yeah, I've been speaking for half an hour, but I can just quickly go through these examples. This is the museum. This is a cultural center that, or a warehouse. This was adapted to a cultural center. Yet again, all these buildings were just completely in damage and disrepair. And it took a team of people who were looking at this in a creative way and focusing on adaptive reuse to bring these buildings to life. And these buildings are so embedded within the community of these towns and cities now. And I suppose the most important governing factors of adaptive reuse decision-making with respect to asset condition are observed to be the building structural integrity, its residual service life, its spatial layout, large floor ceiling heights, the emotional attachment of the building to the public, its location, and its ease of retrofitting or installing new building components to the existing built form. Will I keep on going, or do you want me to stop?
Yeah, we have time, so you can keep going.
Okay, cool. I'll just go quickly through this is kind of more focused on, I suppose, helping aids in relation to adaptive reuse. I suppose in Ireland there is I suppose a list of people called the building renovation advisors. So when you're doing a project, an adaptive reuse project, you can I suppose hire a building renovation advisor. On the Irish Building Council website, we have a list of qualified building renovation advisors, and they offer basically a holistic advice in relation to reaching the goals of zero energy buildings. So looking at U values, overheating, thermal bridging or condensation risk, leaky buildings, ventilation, embodied carbon, and other environmental impacts. So I'd highly recommend looking into that. The SEAI has a list of energy orders, and of course we have the BU assessors, which are in State Energy Authority as well. And there's also an important action that one can take in relation to renovation, which is called a building renovation passport, which I mentioned briefly at the beginning. And basically, this is a roadmap that provides you with what to do, basically without lock-in effects for renovation. And there's a logbook of who has done the work and when the work has been done, which is incredibly important for the future use of the building. So it's looking at the whole building system approach. So in relation to the energy efficiency training clauses, here's a list of training clauses that you can implement within the tender procedure. So this is looking at, I suppose, energy upskilling and looking at on-site training. I can send this on to you though, because I know that I don't have that much time to go through it, but they just, this came from a project that the Irish Building Council conducted with a number of other European project leads, and it led to these key recommendations. And in relation to resources, there's lots of resources about, I suppose, adapting and renovating buildings in relation to circularity and whole life carbon and life cycle costing. Here is a project I was involved in looking at how we can implement circularity, whole life carbon, life cycle costing in public construction projects. It is a book that was created, I suppose, with funding from the EPA. So I can send it on to you as a resource. And it goes through, I suppose, looking at everything I just spoke about there, and it's all aligned to EN 15978, and also looking at the levels framework and also case studies. So circularity of sources that I'd highly recommend looking into and reading when you have the time and space is the Handbook to Building a Circular Economy by David Cheshire. This is sort of the Bible of building a circular economy. So I'd highly recommend getting this book. The Reuse Atlas by Duncan Baker Brown, an incredibly innovative circular architect. Cradle to Cradle, which is very much, yet again, a very important book in relation to circular economy. And the Irish Green Building Council got funding for the Circular Building Coalition to produce a document focusing on the reuse of construction materials in Ireland. And it's a white paper that I was working on for the last few months. So you can download it from the CBC. I'll send this on to you as a resource as well, but it covers a lot of what I've talked about today. More resources are from the FCRBE project, which is focused on facilitating the circulation of reclaimed building elements. These are all free resources. There's resources about, as saying, pre-demolition audits, reuse in relation to green public procurement, and insurance in relation to reclaimed materials, and practical guidelines for contractors using reclaimed materials. These are resources from people who are leading or experts within this field in Europe. Highly recommend looking into them. And also there's the Irish Green Building Council Learning Hub, which we also have courses such as a circularity course, embodied carbon course, and LCC costing course. So yeah, and a tool to use, what I'd highly recommend using, I use within construction project, is called the Regenerate tool. It's a free building circularity tool, and the purpose is to implement the circular economy within the built environment. There's a big focus on collaboration in the tool, and that's a big part of the circular economy, or actually conducting any sort of environmental analysis or actions within a project. We must collaborate, we must communicate for the project to actually really get up on its feet. And it's a great tool because you can also compare design iterations. So if you're showcasing it to a client, you can show how circular a steel building is, or a steel structure building to a timber structure building. And I suppose I don't have that much time left, but this is just an important framework that you may have heard of called levels, which is aligned to everything I've been talking about today. For example, EU taxonomy, and the revised EPBD directive, and also completely aligned to the Climate Action Plan in Ireland. And within levels, there is a number of indicators, such as greenhouse gas emissions along a building's life cycle, resource efficient and circular material, efficient use of water resources, healthy and comfortable spaces, adaptation and resilience, and optimized life cycle cost and value. Today, I've been looking at or speaking about the circular economy, which is the indicator 2, and the macro objectives of this are the bill of quantities, construction and demolition waste and materials, design for adaptability and reuse, and design for deconstruction, reuse, and recycling. So within the levels framework, if you implement this framework, if you implement, let's say, even just macro objective 2, you will create a circular building. And it has all the guidelines of how to do that. And it has all the structure, all the structure is laid out within the levels documents, which are free to download from the European website. So I could go more into levels, but I'm going to stop now. It's just the way I've been speaking. So thank you everyone for listening to my last presentation. This presentation is focused on green public procurement and the CO2 performance ladder in construction. Everything I've already said in relation to circular economy principles, levels framework, and utilizing the Regenerate tool, for example, and adaptive reuse. Yeah, I mean, it's all interlinked, and I suppose we'll see this as I go through this presentation. So yes, this presentation is ultimately about the power of procurement. Yes, the procurement is seen as a massive lever in relation to transitioning to a more sustainable way of building. There's a lot of power in procurement, and I think the stats I'd say in the next few slides will showcase this. And the CO2 performance ladder is focusing on low carbon procurement in Ireland, and it's a tool to aid this process. because as much as we need to be using green public procurement now, it's just nice to have tools to help us in these procedures that have been trialed and tested for many, many years. So here's some just about the European context of green public procurement. So in relation to buildings, public procurement can serve as an opportunity to address the embodied carbon in buildings over their life cycle. In this regard, contracting authorities are important actors that can take action as part of procurement procedures by purchasing new buildings that address global warming potential over the full life cycle. And green public procurement in general is a process where public authorities seek to source goods, services, or works with a reduced environmental impact. So that's the main thing. And green public procurement policies play a vital role in reducing our global carbon impact and protecting our natural resources and the environment. And currently, it is not mandatory or incredibly mandatory to use green public procurement. However, this is going to change, and it's going to change, in my opinion, very, very soon. And that's why many, many companies in the public sector have been using green public procurement for many years before they have to use it, like right now. So, so Ireland has actually committed to implementing green public procurement in all the tenders using public funds. This was brought in 2023, and this will require a major shift in the practices of public bodies and the businesses they contract with. So here are some stats. So European governments spend almost 14% of their gross domestic product on procurement. This is responsible for almost 15% of global carbon emissions. And infrastructure and the construction sector are responsible for almost 80% of these carbon emissions. And Ireland public bodies, excluding utilities, spend an estimated 18.5 billion a year. And this provides Ireland's public sector with significant influence to stimulate and actively encourage the provision of more resource efficient, low carbon, less polluting goods, services, and works across the public sector. Here are some documents that I highly recommend looking at in relation to green public procurement. A document called Buying Green. It's a draft document at the moment, but it should be released, or the final version is meant to be released as stated in the Climate Action Plan in Q1 of this year, which is technically right now. So we'll see if it's going to be in Q1 or maybe it'll be in Q2. But basically, yeah, this is looking at green public procurement strategy and action plan from 2023 to 2027. And then this is a great document from the EPA. It's basically a guidance document about green public procurement with sections on construction. And here's a document from the European Commission, which is the EU Green Public Procurement criteria for the design, construction, renovation, demolition, and management of buildings. So very aligned to what you are doing, also in draft form. So highly recommend looking at this too. So the CO2 performance ladder is an affordable tool to aid the process of green procurement. As I was saying, green procurement, I suppose, reduces operational and environmental costs. And it's important in relation to, I suppose, implementing this at the very outset of the procuring stage, and for everyone who's involved in procurement to understand why we need to implement green public procurement due to the fact that we need to reduce our emissions ASAP. So the CO2 performance ladder is a management system and also a green public procurement tool. It's been implemented in Ireland from April last year, and it's currently in a pilot phase in Ireland, but it has been utilised in many other countries, such as the Netherlands, Belgium. It's been implemented in France, Germany, the UK. And the project is, I suppose, in Ireland, a collaboration with SCOW, the International Institute for Sustainable Development, the ICLEI, and Upshacht University, and it's funded by the IKEA Foundation, and it's based on the power of procurement to drive the climate transition. The project with the Irish Green Building Council is running until May 2025. And a bit about SCOW, who are the owners and administrator of the CO2 performance ladder. They are independent, not-for-profit, and importantly, they're politically neutral. They bring together all the stakeholders, procuring authorities, companies, and NGOs in a collaboration aspect. And the focus is the development implementation of the CO2 performance ladder as a certification scheme and a procurement instrument. And their focus, as I was saying, on connecting, researching, collaborating, and sharing knowledge. So the theory of change, the CO2 performance ladder, is that it's an effective procurement tool that uses the power of procurement to stimulate structural decarbonization. And the focus is that the procuring authorities would state that they're going to implement green public procurement, which is great. They then tender with the CO2 performance ladder. And with the CO2 performance ladder, it's a levels framework, different levels framework I've just mentioned before. But basically, you say to the tenderers that we're opting in for the CO2 performance ladder, and you can choose what level you will choose, depending on where you are in relation to your environmental or sustainable journey. So each tender chooses this level on the CO2 performance ladder. They get an award advantage in relation to the level they choose. And importantly, it's the level or the advantage the level they've chosen is verified by a third party verifier. So it's not an internal audit occurs, but the external audit is the thing that showcases what they've actually done and how they've reached in relation to their CO2 performance ladder and sustainability goal. If they've reached their goal, they get a certificate stating where they're at in the sustainability journey. And this leads to CO2 reduction in projects and organizations, a CO2 reduction in the whole supply chain, and then stimulates behavioral change and CO2 reduction in the heavy industries, such as the construction industry. And the impact of the CO2 performance ladder, it is best practice, as stated by the IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the World Economic Forum, and the OECD. So tendering with the CO2 performance ladder leads to accelerated decarbonization and innovation. It leads to carbon reduction twice as fast. And it also is important in relation to circular procurement. So it can be used as a tool for circular procurement. So it's been used for 15 years, over 15 years now, actually, in the Netherlands, and also been used in Belgium. There's 300 public procuring authorities using the CO2 performance ladder as a green public procurement tool. 1,500 certificates on the CO2 performance ladder have been given out. And you can see the timeline here. It's been running since 2009, and it's been implemented, as I was saying, in the Netherlands for 15 years, in Belgium since 2019, and Ireland and in France, and now in the UK as well. So it is the CO2 performance ladder ultimately has two strands, which is the management system and a green public procurement tool. So I'll go through these now. So in relation to a certified organization on the CO2 performance ladder, it's looking at insights such as verified carbon footprint, very important, looking at transparency and communication, looking at innovation and collaboration and ambitious reduction targets. And your, I suppose, CO2 management system or carbon footprint is verified every year by a third party. And in relation to the green public procurement tool, as I was saying, the procurer would state that they're using the CO2 performance ladder within their, I suppose, to implement green public procurement. They'll tender out stating that they're using the tool, and each tender chooses an ambition level on the ladder. And they get an award advantage at tender because they've opted in for the CO2 performance ladder. You can see here, like level 1, if they opt in to level 1 would be 1% award advantage, level 5 would be 10% award advantage if they choose to have, I suppose, if they choose that's the award advantage. You have the opportunity to choose yourself as a company what suits best. So in relation to choosing level 1, 2, or 3, you're looking at scope 1 and 2 emissions. Scope 1 and 2 emissions are looking at the own organization emissions and the project emissions. So it's looking at just those emissions. Whereas if you're going towards level 4 and 5, you're looking at scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. So that's the supply chain and the industry. So it's up to you in relation to where you're at going towards tender, where I suppose if you're looking at scope 1 and 2 emissions, or you've also looked at scope 3 emissions. Then again, it comes down to where you're at in relation to your sustainability journey. So here's an example of, I suppose, a tender procedure in relation to using the CO2 performance ladder. As I was saying, you can opt out of using the CO2 performance ladder, but you do not get an award advantage at tender. Whereas if you opt in, you do get an award advantage at tender. And then you can be, I suppose in this example, company C, who opted in for level 4 on the ladder, won the contract. Um, so here's the journey of the procuring party and the company. So here's the procuring party. It's all aligned with most economic advantage tendering procedure or criteria. And then it's also the CO2 performance ladder is included in this. The bidders for the project would choose the ambition level on the ladder. So either 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, and the procuring party awards the contract based on the best value of money. And then within 1 year of the project starting on site, there is an internal audit, and then there's an external audit. And let's say if the company stated they wanted to reach level 4 on the ladder or level 3 on the ladder, if they have reached that within as the external audit showcase they've reached that, they get a certificate. So there's a proof that they have reached this level and have reached their sustainability goals. And a lot of this comes from collaboration within the project team to reach these goals. And in relation to the assessment and audit, there's an annual third-party assessment, as I've stated. There's many companies in the Netherlands and also in Ireland who are interested in doing this assessment. And all this is linked to the handbook, which showcases how to do the assessment. And I can link the handbook on after this because it's a great read showcasing how the CO2 performance ladder works in intrinsic detail. And as I was saying, in Ireland, there's lots of auditors who are interested in doing the audits for the ladder, who have experience using management systems such as the ISO 14001, which enables them to basically assess the company's carbon standards. And excitingly, as I was saying, the pilot has been running since April, and TII, which is Transport Infrastructure Ireland, is using the ladder now, and I'll go through that a bit more. But in relation to, I suppose, within the Irish Green Building Council and our responsibility in relation to implementing the ladder, we're responsible, I suppose, as a contact endpoint for using the ladder. We're focusing on supporting any company who's interested in implementing green public procurement and using the CO2 performance ladder. So we look at communication, capacity building, and SCOW is also here as a supportive role to aid Ireland's process in green public procurement. And the reason TII got involved, here's a quote, I suppose, from Dr. Vincent O'Malley stating why, that TII is fully committed to carbon emission reduction and the advancement of a greener future for Ireland. We believe that CO2 performance ladder is a practical tool that can help us achieve our sustainability goals. And I suppose a bit more about TII as well. The project that they're using, or piloting the ladder on, is starting in June. And the tender, or each tenderer chose to opt into the ladder, which is great. I suppose what I've learned from that experience is that a lot of companies in Ireland are doing a lot in relation to reducing their carbon emissions due to, I suppose, the importance of doing that for the environment, but also because of the financial benefits of doing that. So the level that most of the companies chose actually level 4 in the ladder. So as much as I think that a lot of companies maybe aren't doing a lot, there are a lot of companies in the construction industry really doing a lot, but they're not, I suppose, showcasing it. And that's why the certificate on the ladder really does show that they're, I suppose that these companies are really focused on reducing their emissions. And here's a quote from Pat Barry, the CEO of the Irish Green Building Council, stating that by incorporating the CO2 performance ladder into the tendering processes, public bodies can send a clear message to the market. Sustainability is not an option, it is an imperative. And the CO2 performance ladder is a proven instrument in public procurement and carbon emission reduction. Has been highly successful in mainstreaming green public procurement in the Netherlands, and we're pleased to bring it to Ireland. The advantages for procurement authorities is that it's a proven methodology. The CO2 performance ladder is a standard green public procurement tool in the Netherlands and Belgium. It's user-friendly with low transaction costs for getting started. There's a third-party certification, I said, which lowers the burden on procurement authorities to verify the claims, and it's compliant with the EU Procurement Directive, with EU taxonomy, with Fit for 55, and with, I suppose, all the environmental directives within the European Union. And in relation to companies, it's a green business case. It's effective at structural carbon reduction. It reinforces market position as a sustainable supplier and helps improve products and services. It's multi-use, so one certificate can be used for all projects, for all contracting authorities using the ladder in their procurement. So some questions that come up quite a lot in relation to the CO2 performance ladder are, is the ladder aligned to green building certification schemes such as BREEAM and LEED? So the answer is the ladder is not a certification scheme for buildings, products, materials, but for organizations. And of course, a CO2 performance ladder can be easily combined with schemes like BREEAM and LEED, but they're targeting different aspects of the process. When do organizations pay for the CO2 performance ladder? The organizations pay an annual fee, which is actually very, very low, which is great. So when organizations register with SCOW, they then receive an invoice, and for the part of the year that they will be certified, for example, if they register in September, they will pay 25% of the annual fee based on their size category, which is outlined on the CO2 performance ladder website, and thereafter they will be invoiced annually. Key documents for certification, I said before, are the handbook, which is the CO2 performance ladder handbook in the iteration 3.1, and a practical manual for companies looking at how to use the CO2 performance ladder. And there's also a procurement guide, which I highly recommend checking out, and also a legal FAQ for any, I suppose, queries you have about the legal framework. There's never been any legal issues with the CO2 performance ladder within the European Procurement Directive. And TII vigorously looked into the legal aspects of using the tool in Ireland, and there was no issues. So in relation to learning more about the CO2 performance ladder, there is a CO2 performance ladder academy with many, many videos. I was saying there's many documents to read, and there's shorter documents such as the procurement guide and some longer documents such as the handbook. There's many testimonials from a lot of construction companies and infrastructure companies all around Europe. And then many examples of projects that have used the tool and their experience with using the tool. Here is a webinar that the Irish Green Building Council ran in last year. And TII spoke at the webinar talking about their process of implementing the CO2 performance ladder in their tender procedure and successful outcomes of that. And Arab, which are a large construction company, also spoke about their experience of using the ladder for many, many years in the Netherlands and beyond. And I suppose, as I was saying before, it's really important, I suppose, we will engage with learning of all these different topics. I'm aware that I've talked a lot about different ways to implement sustainability within the built environment. And it does take time to integrate, I suppose, these actions. And we need to embody the learning before we do that. So the Irish Green Building Council has on-demand learning courses to do in your own time, such as whole life carbon training and circular economy and construction training that I'd highly recommend looking into. I'd highly recommend looking at all the resources I shared in the last presentation. So thank you so much. I hope you're feeling a little bit inspired to take climate action within construction. My name is Rachel Ockery, and my contact detail is rachel@igbc.ie. If you'd like to send me a message about anything I've discussed today, or about any queries or questions at all. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you so much for inviting me to speak.